Listen carefully, because this is not ordinary language, and this is not an ordinary hour. This is the kind of message that arrives when invisible seasons collide. This is the kind of moment that makes the soul stand still and makes the heart realize it has been standing at the edge of a gate for far longer than it knew. Something is changing now. Something hidden is moving now. Something that was not denied to you, only delayed from you, is finally stepping out of the shadows and into the field of your life. There are moments when existence grows so quiet that the silence itself becomes a trumpet. There are moments when what looked like emptiness was actually preparation, when what looked like abandonment was actually arrangement, when what looked like a closed sky was simply a sky refusing to open before your spirit was strong enough to carry what it would release. This is one of those moments. You thought you were waiting for an answer, but the deeper truth is this. The answer was waiting for a version of you that could stand in its presence without shrinking, without panicking, without worshipping the gift more than the transformation required to hold it. What was held back was never being hidden out of cruelty. It was being guarded by timing. It was being kept behind the curtain until your inner world became wide enough, steady enough, deep enough, and honest enough to receive it. Because some doors are not locked by opposition, they are locked by mercy. And now the air around your life is different. Not because the world has suddenly become kinder, but because something within you has crossed the line. Your endurance crossed the line. Your discernment crossed the line. Your willingness to let go crossed the line. Your silence has matured. Your tears have matured. Your restraint has matured. Your unseen labor has matured. The person you have become in the dark is not the same person who first begged for what is now beginning to move toward you. That is why this opening carries weight. That is why this unveiling feels almost frightening in its magnitude. It is not merely about receiving something new. It is about understanding why it could not come earlier. It is about seeing that sacred timing is not delay for delay's sake. It is wisdom. It is alignment. It is the higher order refusing to place overflowing power into unprepared hands. It is the universe saying, not yet, not because you are forgotten, but because you are being formed. So take a breath and feel the seriousness of this threshold. You are not reading random words, you are standing inside a spiritual announcement, something that has been restrained, sealed, suspended, or held in reserve is beginning to loosen. The seal is breaking. The chamber is opening, the current is shifting, and when this moment fully reveals itself, you will understand that the waiting did not waste you, it built you. What was held back is finally being opened, and it is being opened now. Part 1. What was delayed was never a punishment, it was protection. The first truth you must carry is this. Not every delay is a denial, and not every closed door is rejection. Some things are withheld because they are too sacred to arrive in the wrong season. Some things are protected from you until they can also be protected through you. That is the mystery of higher timing. It does not move according to your desperation. It moves according to your readiness. There were times when you believed the silence around your life meant that nothing was listening. You mistook stillness for indifference. You mistook postponement for abandonment. Yet, beneath the surface, forces you could not see were preventing collisions you did not yet understand. There were rooms you wanted access to before your discernment was developed. There were opportunities you prayed for before your character had enough roots to survive them. There were revelations you longed to hear before your nervous system could carry their weight without breaking into fear, pride, or confusion. If those things had entered your life too early, you might have misnamed them. You might have rushed them. You might have attached your identity to them. You might have received them as trophies rather than responsibilities. And what enters your hands before wisdom enters your bones can become a burden instead of a blessing. This is why the delay was protection. Protection from shallow desires that were dressed like destiny. Protection from connections that would have flattered you while quietly undoing you. Protection from premature recognition that would have fed the outer image while starving the inner self. Protection from misalignment disguised as movement. Protection from your own earlier self. The version of you that was sincere perhaps, but not yet anchored. The unseen was not ignoring your cries. It was reading your structure. It was measuring your foundation. It was asking questions deeper than the ones you were asking. Not, do you want this? But can you carry it? Not, are you excited for it, but will it deepen you or distort you? Not, are you ready to receive? But are you ready to remain whole after receiving? This is where many souls misunderstand the journey. They think blessings are proof of worth, when often they are tests of structure. They think openings are rewards, when often they are invitations into greater responsibility. They think arrival is the goal, when often arrival is only the beginning of stewardship. And stewardship cannot be faked. It is built in hidden places, through surrender, disappointment, inner correction, and the humbling discipline of waiting without turning bitter. Look back now and consider the roads that did not open. Consider the calls that never came. Consider the people who drifted, the plans that dissolved, the timings that broke apart in your hands. You called some of those moments losses, but what if many of them were shields? What if many of them were the higher order refusing to let you build your future on the fracture? What if what hurt your feelings was actually saving your spirit? What if what offended your timeline was protecting your legacy? There is deep maturity in realizing that not every unanswered request was a wound. Some were rescues. Some were course corrections. Some were sacred interruptions that prevented you from entering places where your light would have been consumed by appetites that were never meant to sit near your calling. So do not mourn every door that stayed shut. Some of those doors were not keeping your blessing away. They were keeping your breakdown away. They were keeping your compromise away. They were keeping your spirit from kneeling before lesser things, simply because you were tired of waiting. Now that this opening is beginning, you are being asked to reinterpret your past, not as a story of neglect, but as a story of careful handling, not as evidence that life was against you, but as proof that something far wiser than urgency was involved in your formation. You were not forgotten in the delay. You were being protected inside it. And once you understand that, the bitterness begins to dissolve. The ache starts to make sense. The silence stops looking empty. You realize that what was withheld was not being kept from you forever. It was being preserved until your spirit could meet it with clarity, dignity, and steadiness. The delay did not dishonor you. It defended you. Part 2. The hidden thing was also growing inside you. What is opening now is not only outside you, it is also within you. That is the second truth. The thing held back was never merely a future event, a person, an opportunity, a breakthrough, or a visible shift in circumstance. It was also the emergence of a deeper self. While you were waiting for life to change, something in you was being built in silence. A chamber was being expanded. A voice was being clarified. A center was being formed. The outer opening could not come before the inner opening. That is why so much of your journey has felt invisible. The most important work was happening where applause could not follow, in places where no audience gathered, in seasons where your progress would not have impressed the world, because it was not flashy enough to be measured by surface standards. Yet, hidden work is often the holiest work because it is where the architecture of the soul is rewritten. You are learning how to hear yourself more honestly. You are learning how to separate intuition from fear, longing from illusion, movement from purpose. You are learning that being chosen for a deeper life does not always look glamorous. Often it looks like being stripped of false identities. It looks like being emptied of borrowed ambitions. It looks like being separated from what once entertained you because your spirit can no longer live on noise. It looks like feeling strange in rooms that used to fit because your soul has outgrown the frequency of performance. This is an inner awakening, and awakening is rarely comfortable at first. The hidden thing growing inside you is discernment, not the kind that makes you suspicious of everything, but the kind that helps you sense the difference between what sparkles and what is true, between what is loud and what is real, between what stimulates the ego and what nourishes the soul. Discernment is what makes a person stop begging to be admitted into spaces that cannot honor their essence. Discernment is what teaches a person that not every invitation is alignment, and not every delay is loss. The hidden thing growing inside you was also capacity. You prayed for overflow, but life answered by enlarging your container. An enlargement is not a gentle process. It stretches. It exposes weakness. It tears away old patterns. It asks you to stop living from reflex and start living from consciousness. Capacity is built when you learn how to sit with uncertainty without collapsing into panic. It is built when you learn how to hold your peace in the presence of misunderstanding. It is built when you can endure not knowing without trading your center for quick relief. What is opening now required this capacity, because what is truly meant for you will not merely bless you, it will ask more of you. It will ask you to be more honest, more grounded, more disciplined, more sovereign over your attention, your emotions, your words and your loyalties. Real openings do not only expand your possibilities, they expose your maturity. They reveal whether you are prepared to live at the level you once only dreamed about. This is why the inner self had to be formed in secret. You needed to become someone who could recognize the opening without idolizing it, someone who could receive expansion without abandoning integrity, someone who would not reduce destiny to comfort, but would understand it as responsibility shaped by grace, truth, and timing. And let this be said with full force. The world often celebrates visible arrival while completely ignoring invisible becoming. But invisible becoming is the reason visible arrival can endure. Without inner transformation, outer change is unstable. Without inner steadiness, outer blessings turn into outer chaos. Without inward revelation, outward success becomes another mask. So honor what has been growing in you. Honor the quiet maturity no one clapped for. Honor the nights you chose reflection over reaction. Honor the mornings you kept going without evidence. Honor the decisions no one understood because they were born from an inner clarity the crowd could not hear. What has been withheld is beginning to open because something within you has also opened. You are not simply approaching a new chapter. You are approaching it as a different being. And that difference matters more than any visible reward. Because the deepest miracle is not only that the door is opening. The deepest miracle is that you are no longer the same person who first stood outside it. Part 3. Your obedience in silence broke an old pattern. There is a kind of power the world rarely notices because it does not announce itself. It is the power of quiet obedience. It is the power of walking away without spectacle. It is the power of refusing what flatters you because it violates something sacred in you. It is the power of choosing alignment when everything in your history tries to pull you back into old cycles. That power has shaped this moment more than you realize. What was held back until now was connected to a decision you made in private, a boundary you set without applause, a pattern you interrupted without witnesses, a temptation you outgrew even while part of you still trembled, a false attachment you stopped feeding, a version of yourself you finally refused to keep resurrecting. These private obediences alter destinies. People often imagine transformation as one giant visible event, but most of the time, transformation begins when someone gets tired of betraying themselves in small, familiar ways. It begins when the soul says no more to what has been normalized, but not sanctified by truth. It begins when a person stops performing loyalty to pain. It begins when they realize that what keeps wounding them only has power because it still has access. And access changes everything. The reason this opening is happening now is because something lost access to you. The old script lost access. The old manipulation lost access. The old hunger for approval lost access. The old need to explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you lost access. The old agreement with fear lost access. The old pattern of shrinking to keep others comfortable lost access. The old romance with self-abandonment lost access. That is not a small thing. The universe responds when a soul stops negotiating with what diminishes it, not because existence is petty, but because truth multiplies where distortion is no longer being entertained. When you withdraw your agreement from what drains your light, energy starts moving differently. Your field becomes clearer. Your hearing becomes sharper. Your center becomes less cluttered. The path that seemed blocked begins to reveal itself, not because it was never there, but because you are no longer standing in the smoke of your former compromises. Obedience, in its deepest sense, is not blind submission. It is coherent alignment. It is the brave act of living in agreement with what your spirit knows, even when your comfort would rather return to the familiar. It is choosing the narrow bridge of truth over the wide road of self-betrayal. It is refusing to keep calling a cage a home, simply because you learned how to decorate it. You have paid for this moment through restraint, through solitude, through endings, through misunderstood choices, through nights when the easiest thing would have been to go back to what was familiar, even if it was harmful. Through days when no one could see that your greatest battle was not external at all, but internal. The battle to stop reopening doors that existence itself had been trying to close for you. Do not underestimate the spiritual authority that is born when a person finally honors the warning within themselves. There is a sacred gravity in that, a mature force, a signal to the unseen that says, this one is no longer available for cycles that insult their becoming. That signal matters, because once the old pattern loses access, what was withheld no longer needs to remain behind the veil. The opening can begin. The next chapter can approach. The withheld current can be released because the inner sabotage that once would have leaked its power has been named, challenged, and weakened. You may have thought your silent obedience was too small to matter, but every time you chose peace over chaos, truth over appetite, integrity over performance, you were rewriting a contract. Every time you withheld your energy from what was no longer aligned, you were making room. Every time you walked away from what your soul had outgrown, you were signaling readiness for something cleaner, deeper, and more durable. And now the consequence of that obedience is beginning to appear, not as punishment, not as loss, but as an opening. Because what is meant for the awakened cannot fully arrive while the old pattern still has a key. Part 4. The opening required healing, not just hunger. Not everything is solved by desire. Not everything is unlocked by wanting it badly enough. Some thresholds do not respond to hunger alone. They respond to healing. That is the fourth truth, and it is one of the hardest to accept because the wounded self often believes intensity is the same as readiness. It is not. You can deeply want something and still be too hurt to hold it well. This is why your healing mattered. What was held back until now could not safely enter a heart that was still organizing its life around old injuries. It could not fully arrive while unprocessed pain was still deciding your choices. It could not settle in a spirit still trying to prove its worth through exhaustion, overgiving, self-abandonment, emotional begging, or endless performance. The opening required more than your hope. It required your restoration. Healing is not a decorative phase. It is structural. It changes how you interpret what comes toward you. A wounded heart sees danger where there is depth, fantasy where there is sincerity, rejection where there is timing, and attachment where there should be discernment. A healing heart begins to see more clearly. It stops confusing chaos for passion. It stops confusing delay for worthlessness. It stops confusing attention for love. It stops confusing movement for meaning. This clarity is part of what makes the opening possible now, because healing teaches you how to receive without grasping. It teaches you how to want deeply without worshipping outcomes. It teaches you how to stay open without becoming porous to everything. It teaches you how to remain tender without becoming easily invaded. It teaches you how to hold beauty without panicking that it will disappear the second you relax. Healing returns dignity to desire. And dignity changes everything. When dignity returns, you stop crawling toward what should come in truth. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into places that only welcome your usefulness, not your presence. You stop carrying old grief like an identity. You stop offering your future to the unresolved ghosts of your past. You stop building altars to wounds that were supposed to become wisdom. Perhaps that is why some of your healing felt so lonely. Because it was not cosmetic healing. It was deep excavation. It reached below your habits and into your beliefs. It uncovered where you learned to expect little. It exposed where you made survival your whole personality. It revealed where pain became so familiar that peace started to feel suspicious. It showed you where you still interpreted gentleness as weakness and steadiness as boredom, because your system had been trained to recognize chaos more quickly than safety. Oh, this needed to be healed. Not because you were broken beyond repair, but because what is opening now deserves a whole response. It deserves your presence, not just your projection. It deserves your maturity, not just your craving. It deserves a version of you who can enter a new season without dragging every old wound into the room and asking the new chapter to apologize for what the old chapter did. That is why your healing had to precede the unveiling. And let this be honored properly. Healing is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is refusing to romanticize what destroyed your peace. Sometimes it is learning to rest without guilt. Sometimes it is letting yourself be seen by truth instead of by performance. Sometimes it is crying until the body stops carrying a sentence it never should have memorized. Sometimes it is choosing not to retaliate. Sometimes it is finally telling yourself the truth about what hurt you, what shaped you, and what can no longer lead you. Healing did not make you smaller. It made you safer for your own future. Now the opening can occur with less distortion. Now the blessing can approach without being swallowed by panic. Now the withheld thing can move toward you without becoming another battlefield for wounds that should have been laid down long ago. So do not despise the healing season you endured. It was not a detour from destiny. It was the cleansing of the chamber destiny was going to enter. It was a restoration of the inner ground. It was the gentle, difficult, sacred work of making your spirit habitable for what could only arrive in peace. The opening required healing, and because healing has been taking place, the seal can now begin to break. Part 5. What is being opened is tied to your true purpose, not your old image. There is a profound difference between what feeds your image and what fulfills your purpose. One asks how you appear. The other asks why you exist. One is obsessed with being seen. The other is devoted to being aligned. One can gather applause and still leave the soul empty. The other can require solitude and still leave the spirit full. What is being opened now belongs to purpose, not performance. That distinction matters, because many people spend years chasing what excites their ego while quietly abandoning what cools their essence. They seek validation, visibility, status, control, and proof. They want movement they can show. They want results they can point to. They want a life that can be translated into admiration. But purpose does not always unfold along the routes that flatter the outer self. Often it dismantles that self first. Often it asks you to release who you thought you need to be before it reveals who you actually are. You have been living inside that dismantling. The thing withheld until now was never meant to inflate your image. It was meant to anchor your function. It was meant to align your outer life with your inner assignment. It was meant to connect your gifts, your endurance, your wounds transformed into wisdom, your voice, your timing, your restraint, and your strange path into something coherent. What is opening now is not random fortune. It is a corridor of purpose that required your identity to become less performative and more real. This is why the road has felt so refining. Purpose is rarely handed to the full self. The full self wants to be admired, protected, and reassured at all times. Purpose asks to be embodied, even when misunderstood. The full self wants quick confirmation. Purpose often moves with slow certainty. The full self asks, will they clap for me? Purpose asks, will you remain faithful to truth when no one is watching? That question has shaped your becoming. There were seasons when you thought you were losing pieces of yourself, but what was really happening was an unmasking. You were losing borrowed identities. You were losing narratives you adopted to survive, to belong, to be praised, or to avoid rejection. You were losing the need to make your life legible to people who only understand shallow versions of success. You were losing the compulsion to make every step explainable. And in that loss, something truer began to breathe. Purpose is not always immediately glamorous, because it does not begin with display. It begins with congruence. It begins when your inner convictions and your outer choices stop contradicting one another. It begins when the life you are building no longer insults the truth you carry. It begins when what you create, what you accept, what you pursue, and what you refuse all start speaking the same language. That language is becoming clearer in you now. And because it is becoming clearer, what was withheld can finally be entrusted to you. Not as decoration, not as a distraction, not as another shiny object to keep you occupied, but as a living extension of your deeper assignment. What is opening now will make more sense to your soul than to your ego. It may not flatter the version of you that wanted immediate recognition, but it will nourish the version of you that is ready to live from essence rather than display. This is where peace deepens. When you stop asking life to make you look important and start asking it to make you true. When you stop seeking the largest stage and start seeking the clearest alignment. When you stop measuring success by noise and start measuring it by integrity, impact, coherence, and sacred usefulness. Purpose has its own gravity. It gathers the right timing, the right tests, the right endings, the right preparation, and the right openings. It cannot be rushed by vanity because vanity cannot sustain it. It cannot be built on pretense because pretense cannot carry its weight. It requires a real self. That real self is emerging in you. So do not fear that what is opening now will be too small for your former fantasies. It may in fact be greater than your fantasies because it will belong to your truth. And whatever belongs to truth lasts differently, it roots differently, it breathes differently, it blesses differently. What is finally being opened is not merely what you wanted, it is what belongs to why you are here. Part 6. Divine timing is not passive, it is precise, intelligent, and alive. There are people who hear the phrase sacred timing and imagine passive waiting. But sacred timing is not passivity. It is precision, it is living intelligence, moving beyond the range of your immediate understanding. It is the orchestration of inner readiness, outer conditions, energetic alignment, necessary endings, unseen rearrangements, and the ripening of truth. It is not delay without purpose. It is sequence with wisdom. This is what you are touching now. What was withheld did not remain hidden because existence forgot your address. It remained hidden because timing was still building the bridge between your present self and the version of reality prepared to meet you. Timing was not standing still. It was adjusting conditions. It was removing what would interfere. It was ripening what was incomplete. It was allowing certain illusions to expire so you would stop mistaking substitutes for substance. Timing is alive in this way. It listens to more than your requests. It listens to the condition of the soil. It listens to the maturity of your attention. It listens to the health of your boundaries. It listens to whether you still secretly long for what would sabotage you. It listens to whether you are ready to lose the comfort of your familiar suffering in order to inhabit something freer. Timing is not just about the world around you. It is also about the world within you. And that is why it can feel so mysterious. There were days when you thought nothing was moving because nothing visible had changed. But visible stillness is not proof of invisible inactivity. Seeds split underground in silence. Foundations are laid below sight. Currents shift before the wave appears. Seasons prepare themselves before the first public sign arrives. The most consequential processes are often hidden until they are ready to emerge all at once. You have been inside such a process. Now precision is meeting fulfillment. Certain cycles have ended. Certain internal permissions have been granted. Certain false dependencies have weakened. Certain truths have become undeniable. And because these necessary developments have matured, timing is no longer withholding in the same way. It is opening. This should humble you and strengthen you at once. Humble you because you realize life was never yours to force into coherence through urgency alone. Strengthen you because you realize your waiting was not meaningless. Your patience was not empty. Your restraint was not wasted. Your continued alignment in the absence of evidence was part of the agreement that kept you available for this exact moment. Timing responds beautifully to inner steadiness. When a person learns not to contaminate every season with panic, they become easier to lead into fullness. When a person learns to stop prying open what has not ripened, they become safer for real openings. When a person stops making idols out of deadlines and starts honoring depth, sequence, and truth, life begins to reveal its intelligence to them. They stop living in constant battle with the unfolding. They start participating in it consciously. That participation is what is changing your life now. You are no longer relating to timing as an enemy. You are beginning to see it as a teacher. A stern teacher perhaps, but a wise one. A teacher that refused to hand you the key while you still wanted the room for the wrong reasons. A teacher that let you ache long enough to discover whether your longing was rooted in truth or merely in impatience. A teacher that used silence not to torment you, but to refine your hearing. Now the lesson is becoming revelation. Sacred timing did not ask you to shrink. It asked you to ripen. It did not ask you to disappear. It asked you to deepen. It did not ask you to give up on what was real. It asked you to release your demand that it arrive before its hour. And now its hour is near. The opening you are sensing is not accidental. It is timed. It is intelligent. It is sequenced. It is alive with meaning. It is the result of 1,000 invisible adjustments and one very important visible fact. You stayed. You remained present long enough for time to become truth. Part 7. The opening is also the return of your spiritual authority. The final truth is perhaps the deepest one of all. What is being opened is not only a door in your life, it is the return of your authority. Not domination over others, not loud superiority, not a brittle performance of power, but spiritual authority in its truest form. The ability to stand in your own center without apology, distortion, or surrender to forces that once ruled you. This is the kind of authority that does not need to shout because it no longer doubts its source. For too long, many sensitive souls have lived beneath their own stature, not because they lack value, but because life trained them to abandon themselves early. They learned to second-guess their knowing. They learned to dim their clarity to keep others comfortable. They learned to speak carefully around people committed to misreading them. They learned to call their intuition overreaction and their sacred unrest instability. They learned to betray their own signal in order to remain acceptable. But authority begins to return the moment self-betrayal loses its throne. That return is happening in you. What has been withheld until now was partly waiting for you to recover your posture. Not your physical posture, but your spiritual posture. The posture of someone who no longer negotiates with inner truth just because the room is unconvinced. The posture of someone who does not beg false doors to open. The posture of someone who no longer hands their self-definition to public opinion, old wounds or inherited fear. The posture of someone who remembers that peace is not weakness, clarity is not cruelty, and boundaries are not abandonment. This is sacred authority. It changes how you walk into your next season. It changes how you speak, how you choose, how you refuse, how you wait, how you love, how you work, how you rest, how you interpret setbacks, and how you recognize what belongs in your field. Authority is not merely confidence. Confidence can still depend on favorable circumstances. Authority remains even when circumstances wobble, because it is rooted in inner congruence. And inner congruence is what your entire journey has been teaching you. That is why the opening now feels larger than a simple reward. It feels like restoration. It feels like the return of something ancient in you, a knowing, a steadiness, a clean flame, a remembered dignity, a capacity to stand upright in the middle of uncertainty and still know who you are. Not because everything is easy, but because the center of you is no longer available for sale. Once that authority returns, life interacts with you differently. You stop attracting the same distortions in the same ways. You become less seducible by urgency, less controllable through guilt, less breakable by delay, less hypnotized by appearances, more responsive to truth, more committed to coherence, more able to bless without bleeding, more able to discern without becoming cold, more able to remain soft without becoming weak. This is power refined by wisdom, and that is exactly why the opening can happen now. because what is finally being revealed would have overwhelmed the earlier version of you. But the current version of you has earned a different relationship with reality, not through perfection, but through surrender, formation, honesty, healing, endurance, and the slow retrieval of your own sacred center. You have walked through enough inner weather to know that authority is not something granted by crowds. It is remembered in silence. Now remember it fully. Let what opens now meet a person who no longer calls themselves small just because they once felt unseen. Let it meet a person who no longer confuses humility with self-erasure. Let it meet a person who can carry blessing without collapsing into pride, and carry responsibility without collapsing into fear. Let it meet someone whose spirit is no longer asking permission to become what truth has already declared possible. Because this is the final unveiling. What was held back was not only the gift, it was also the full emergence of the one who could carry it. And that one is rising now. Closing declaration. So here you stand, at the edge of an unveiling that has taken longer than your comfort wanted, deeper than your mind could measure, and wiser than your old self could understand. What was held back was not forgotten. What was sealed was not lost. What was delayed was not discarded. It was being preserved for this moment, this threshold, this hour in which your soul could finally meet it without shrinking, distorting, worshipping, or wasting it. Read that truth again in your spirit. It was not lost, it was preserved. What is opening now carries the weight of every silent night you survived, every unseen battle you fought, every false attachment you outgrew, every boundary you set, every tear that clarified you, every season that emptied you, every delay that protected you, every wound that turned into wisdom, and every private act of obedience that kept your inner flame alive when nothing around you seemed to confirm the path. This is why you must not speak lightly about your journey anymore. This is why you must not reduce yourself to what others failed to recognize. This is why you must not call yourself late when your life was being timed by a deeper clock. This is why you must not despise your hidden seasons. They were not blank years. They were sacred years. Years of formation, years of correction, years of purification, years in which the unseen was preparing both the opening and the soul that would walk through it. And now the declaration is clear. What was held back is being released. What was veiled is being revealed. What was closed is beginning to open. What was silent is beginning to speak. What was forming in darkness is beginning to arrive in power. Do not return to your former smallness after hearing this. Do not go back to doubting what your spirit already knows. Do not reopen the old doors that sacred timing works so hard to close. Do not hand your future back to fear simply because the threshold feels bigger than what you have known. This is not the hour to retreat. This is the hour to stand still, breathe deeply, and receive with dignity what could only come when your inner world became ready. Carry yourself accordingly. Honor your healing. Honor your alignment. Honor your becoming. Honor your authority. And when the opening becomes visible in ways even your human mind can no longer deny, remember this. The miracle was never only in what arrived. The miracle was in what you became while waiting. If this message found you at the exact right time, then receive it fully. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, leave a comment, and share this video with someone whose spirit is standing on the edge of its own opening. Let this message travel where it is needed. Let it reach the hearts that are tired of mistaking delay for abandonment. Let it awaken the ones who need to remember that sacred timing still moves, hidden things still open, And the soul that remains true through the silence will never remain empty forever. This is not the end of your waiting alone. This is the beginning of your unveiling. And nothing that was truly prepared for you can remain sealed forever once your spirit has become ready to carry its light.